Masechet Pesachim. We're at Pei Gimel 83, and we're going to start with the Mishnah. Very interesting cases today. Hatzamot v'hagidin v'hanotad yisarefu b'shisha asar. So there are various parts of the Korban Pesach that we are going to need to burn, including the bones, the sinews, and anything that's left over are burnt on the 16th. So let's explain each one. Notar is the most obvious one. We've seen the pasuk. You're supposed to eat the entire korban during that night, the night of the seder. Anything that's left over to the morning, anything edible you should have eaten and you didn't, is left over and must be burnt. That's notar. Now the other two, the general principle is only something that was edible do you have to burn. A part of the animal that was never edible to begin with, you just discard it. You don't actually have to burn it. So we're going to have to figure out what exactly is edible about atzamot and gidim. Atzamot, bones, not edible. Gidin, we translate as sinews, but actually could be referred to anything that's long and thin, including nerves and tendons and even arteries. Right, it would all be gidin. So here's Gemara is going to ask, if they're edible, then eat them. If they're not edible, then why do you have to burn them? That's going to be a question there. Atzamot, let me introduce right now. Atzamot is a special law for Korban Pesach that you may not break any bones. Right, ve'atzem lo tishberu bo. So when you're eating Korban Pesach, you can't eat it like a caveman and go, crack open the bones. You have to eat it in a dignified way, all right? Not all in a rush and right, but like a king would eat. So therefore, you can't break open the bones. Now, why would you break open the bones? Generally, inside the bone there is marrow. So which means the Korban Pesach, you would never be able to eat the marrow inside. So that's one possible answer. You got to burn the bones because of the marrow inside. What if you break it open first and then let out the marrow and then burn the marrow? Okay, can you break the bones once it's notar and it's not edible anymore? All right, that will be the discussion about bones. So all these three categories must be burnt. When do you burn it? Well, the 14th is when you prepare. The 15th is when at night you're eating it. The 15th during the day is the first day of Yom Tov, and you don't burn things on Yom Tov. We'll discuss why. And so instead, you do it on the 16th, which is the first day of Chol HaMoed in Israel. Chal shisha asar liot b'Shabbat, yisarefu b'shiva asar. What if the 16th is Shabbat? In other words, they have Yom Tov, followed immediately by Shabbat. You don't burn things, you're not eating it, you're just burning it to get rid of it. You don't burn things that you're not eating on Yom Tov, and you don't burn anything on Shabbat. So then in that case, you would push it off till the 17th, the second day of Chol HaMoed, third day of the holiday. Because the burning of these categories does not override not Shabbat and not Yom Tov. That is the Mishnah. Let me first show you the outline of the Gemara. First, we're going to talk about why we burn the bones. We're going to see actually there's two basic answers. One is that they are holders for the notar marrow inside. And just as holders, just being like the basis containing the marrow, that requires burning. That's going to be Yishak's answer. We're going to try to prove that from our Mishnah. A second answer is going to be that they contain marrow. So you're burning it because of the marrow inside. And this assumes that they cannot be broken even after they're disqualified. Even that's the next day, you still can't just break it and empty it out and burn the marrow only and throw out the bones. You're never allowed to break it, so you have to burn the whole thing for the food itself. Then we're going to go back and challenge the first answer, it should be one, from based on the Baraita, and see two answers to that. After that, we're going to talk about burning of the sinews. Are they edible? Are they not? What about the next sinews? That'll be one possibility. I'll come back to the chart. And finally, we'll talk about why can't you burn notar on Yom Tov? You can make fire on Yom Tov. You can use it for other things. We'll see four answers to that. All right. Back to bones. Amar Rav Mari bar Abu Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. The Amora Rabbi Yitzchak explains why he says a general halacha. He's not actually talking about this Mishnah. He's not talking about Korban Pesach. A general halacha regarding Korbanot. Asmot kadashim sheshimeshu notar metamein et hayadayim. If you have bones of a sacrifice that held notar, right? That leftover meat that is not allowed to be eaten. Notar, in addition to the fact that you have to burn notar, it also causes tum'ah. It will cause your hands, these bones will cause your hands to be tameh. When you say your hands are tameh, that's a lower level of tum'ah midrabanan. The rabbis wanted you to keep away from these things, so they said it makes your hands tameh. It's a lower level because all you have to do is do netilat yadayim to get rid of it. Ho'il v'na'asa basis ledavar ha'asur. Why? Because they became the basis for something that is prohibited. The notar is prohibited, so even though the bones themselves are not edible, and so don't fit into the category of notar, because they're the basis of notar, they get the same law as the notar itself. That's his halacha that he says about all sacrifices. Now, can we bring a proof? Our Mishnah says that bones of the Pesach must be burnt. Now, why? What kind of bones are we talking about? If the bones have no marrow in them, I don't know, maybe they're very thin bones, or they were already broken somehow. I know he said you're not allowed to break them, but let's say they were broken, or maybe after it became unedible, notar, then you broke them, and so there's no marrow in them. If there's no marrow in them, why do I need to burn them? Nishdinhu, just throw them out. So that can't be talking about the case. Ella peshita de'it behu mawach, must be that these are bones that have marrow in them. Okay, they have marrow in them. If you think that something that is the basis for notar is itself like notar, then that's why you have to burn the bones. But if the basis of if it's not, if you say that something that serves, that holds notar is not like notar itself, why would I need to burn it? Break them now, right? Because now we're assuming that the bones of Korban Pesach, you can't break them at night when you're allowed to eat it, right? During the eating process, you're not allowed to break the bones. But afterwards, once it's notar, then you are allowed to break them. That's what we're assuming now. So therefore, if there is marrow inside, then all you need to do is that next day, break them open, right? Let out the marrow, burn the marrow, and throw out the bones. There would be no need to burn the bones in that case. If you assume that in that case, therefore we can infer from our Mishnah that something that is the basis, that it holds notar, is like notar itself. And therefore these bones, even if you would empty out the marrow from them, you still need to burn them because they once held marrow, and therefore something that holds notar, the marrow is edible, that marrow becomes notar. These bones were holding the notar, and they must be burnt because something that holds notar is like notar itself. And therefore, that is a proof for the opinion of Rabbi Yishak, who says that in general regarding other korbanot. All right, now that we have the proof, let's refute it. No, I'm going to go with the opposite assumption that something that is the basis for notar is not like notar. And so the bones don't get any inherent problem themselves. When the pasuk says, do not break a bone in it, in the Korban Pesach, that means not only when the Korban Pesach is kosher and I can eat it, even an unfit Korban Pesach, right? Even the next day, no matter what, I can never break the bones. And therefore, I can't, there's no way to get out the marrow. So why do I have to burn it? Because there's marrow inside and I can't break it open. So how am I going to burn the marrow that's edible? I got to burn the entire bone, right? So that I could say that. Now, in order to have that answer, I have to assume that even when the Korban Pesach is unfit, you still can't break them. We have another Mishnah we're going to see later on that says, if you left over meat that is tahor, or if you break a bone of an animal that's tameh, you don't get lashes. So the second part is what's important for us. Breaking a bone of a tameh sacrifice that's unfit, you don't get lashes. So it sounds like you're allowed to do that, right? So you just said that if it's an unfit animal, I cannot break the bones. This says if it's an unfit tameh animal, I can break the bones. There's no punishment if I do. So la kashya, there's no problem, there's no contradiction. Kan she'ayta lo sha'at kosher, kan she'lo hayta lo sha'at kosher. We were talking about when we said you can't do it. That's when the animal was kosher at night, and now it became notar, and it's no longer fit. Now, so since it was at one point a kosher sacrifice, and you can't break the bones, therefore that continues, and you can never break the bones. This Mishnah here is talking about when it becomes tameh, meaning it was tameh the whole time. It was never fit to be kosher. It was never a fit animal. If the Korban Pesach had never had a time when it was kosher, then the laws of breaking the bones don't apply to it at all. And so in that case, you can break the bones. But if it was ever fit, you cannot break the bones. And so that we defend that answer. All right. Now that we saw that refutation, I mean, it's not a proof. It doesn't refute Rabbi Yishak. We just don't have a proof for Rabbi Yishak. We want to see these two opinions. Can you break a bone of an unfit animal or not? Right, this answer you gave. Who is a Tana that actually would agree with that you can, there's a difference between a sacrifice that was once kosher, then you can never break the bones, or if it was never kosher, then you can break the bones. Rabbi Yaakov, right? So our whole answer is going to depend on this Tana, whose name is Rabbi Yaakov. We're going to see him in the Baraita, the Tanya. Bo bekasher velo bepasul. The Tana Kama says the word bo means you cannot break a bone in it, which is a limiting word, and says only if it's a kosher sacrifice. But if it's a non-kosher sacrifice, go ahead and break the bones. Rabbi Yaakov omed hayta lo shata kosher v'nifsal yesh bo mishum shivirat esem. Rabbi Yaakov is more machmir, and he says if it was ever kosher, even if it became unfit later, you still apply the law, the prohibition against breaking bones. If it was never kosher, and bo mishum shivirat esem, then there's no prohibition of breaking bones. Rabbi Shimon omer echad zeh ve'echad zeh en bo mishum shivirat esem. Rabbi Shimon is more lenient, and he says no matter what, and once it's unfit, you can break the bones. Doesn't matter if it was once kosher or not kosher. So see that actually Tanakama just said not pasul, but when we say not pasul, what does that mean? Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon are two interpretations of what not pasul means. So Rabbi Shimon says, and if it's a pasul, doesn't matter if it was once, always pasul, or once kosher, you can break the bones. Okay, so now we actually we have an answer. Let's return to the outline. So we saw the Yishak, who says that holders for notar are like the marrow itself, and we tried to bring a proof from the Mishnah. The proof did not work. In the end, I mean, this would have answered the question of why we burn the bones. We might burn the bones because they were holders for notar. So once they're holders for notar, they are like notar itself, and so therefore they have to be burnt, even if there's no marrow in them. That would explain, even though bones are not edible, you still have to burn them because they were holders. That was one answer, but it only applies if you follow Rabbi Shimon. So we have a second answer, that the bones themselves contain marrow, and we're not allowed to break them ever, right? Not even after the korban becomes disqualified, you cannot break them because it was once kosher. That's the opinion of the Tana, Rabbi Yaakov. So we have actually two answers to why we break the bones. Now that we finished that, we're going to challenge Rabbi Yitzchak based on the Baraita. We'll see two answers, Ranbi and Rav Zevid, about what the case is in this Baraita. Meti be kol atzmot hakodashim en te'onin serefa. Chutz me'atzmot hapesach mipnei hatakala. All bones of sacrificial animals you do not have to burn because they're not edible. They're not part of not part of the meat. So even if they become pasul or notar, you don't have to burn them, except for korban pesach, because of the takala, because of the problem that can come about. What's the problem? Well, pesach is different because you can't break them open. So now you have the marrow inside. So therefore, these bones do require burning. Okay, what kind of bones are we talking about in this Baraita? If there is no longer any marrow in them, then why would I need to burn them in the case of Korban Pesach? That it says you have to burn them. So must be talking about when they do have marrow in them. So if they are bones that have marrow in them, then if you think that bones that were the basis held notar is like notar, then the bones of all other sacrifices, why do you say you don't need to burn them? You should need to burn those also, because those bones once had marrow in them, and according to Yishak, holding marrow gives them the state. Holding notar gives them the same status, and they should also require burning. And so therefore, it seems that the Yishak is refuted, and this only makes sense that you say that you wouldn't burn them because there's no longer marrow in them, and so it doesn't matter if they were the basis of having a basis of containing notar in them. That's the question. First answer. We're talking about a case when we found the bones and they were already broken when the marrow was removed from them. And so actually we don't know when was the marrow removed from them. Was it when it was kosher to eat or when it became notar? So we have to now make a supposition. Atzmot kodashim de'en bahum mishibirat esem. If you're talking about all other sacrifices besides korban pesach, where you're allowed to break the bones, we can assume that whoever was handling and eating this korban, they probably wanted the marrow when they were eating it, and they broke the bone and they ate the marrow, and while it was still kosher. So therefore, these bones were never a basis for notar. And that's why you don't need to burn them. Whereas asmota pesach, but pesach, you have a prohibition against breaking them. Therefore, I assume that while they were edible, a person would not break it. That's not prohibited. So they must have broken it after the time of it being edible. So that means they were still whole with the marrow in them when they became notar. And so they are the basis of notar, and that's why they require burning. Okay, so that's one answer, that we found them and we're not actually sure of the status. So this is just telling us the presupposition in one case versus the other. Second answer, a little bit similar. Rav Zevid amar, I found a whole pile of bones. I see some of them are broken open and the marrow was removed, and I don't want to have to bother checking all of them, right? So what's the law in that case? Asmot kodashim de'en behu mishum shibirat esem lechuluhu haba chales lehu v'achel lehu v'la ba'eh serefa. If they are not korban pesach, other korbanot where I'm allowed to break it open, so then I can assume, even though I only see some of them, you don't have to bother the person to go and check everyone. We can make an assumption that all of them were broken open and the marrow was taken out and he ate it when it was permitted, when it was kosher. So they never had notar in them, and that's why they don't need to be burned. Whereas asmata pesach, but if it's korban pesach, then since you have a prohibition against breaking them open, maybe these were cracked open, but maybe the other ones, the marrow was not removed. And so therefore, when I have the pile, I can't assume that they're all okay. I have to burn them. All right, that's the second answer. And now we can go on to the gidin. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kol hagidin basar chutz migideh savad. Okay, Rav's saying a general law that all sinews are edible. They are meat. This would make a difference in halacha because let's say you have 10 people joining in for one sheep. You have to have a kezayit for each person. So when you're evaluating how many kezetot are in this sheep, you can add in the gidin because they are edible also. So you add that to the volume of the sheep, and you could add a few more people, except for the sinews that are in the neck. Those are really tough and impossible to eat, so those are not considered meat. That was Rav's halacha. Now we're going to test it out with our Mishnah. Tenan hasamot v'agidim v'hanotar yisarefu b'shisha asar. We said here the sinews have to be burnt on the 16th. In other words, you have to burn them. Now, what do we think about? What kind of sinews are these? What's their status? If they are edible, then eat them, right? Why would you assume that you're going to burn them? Any part of the animal that's edible, you must eat. So if they were edible and you have to burn them because they're notar, notar. That's the third category in the Mishnah. Mishnah already mentioned notar. So the gidim is not different from any other part of the basar that you would eat. So gidim can't be talking about something that's inedible because then you don't have to burn it. And it can't be talking about something edible because then you should either eat it or it's notar. So what is it talking about? Ela peshita gideh savar. It's talking about this category of the sinews in the neck, which are edible, but only with great difficulty. So technically, they do need to be burned because they are somewhat edible, but realistically, people are not going to eat it because it's so difficult. So they will end up having to be burnt. Okay, so that explains the Mishnah. Now, if you think that these sinews are meat, then I understand. That's why you have to burn them. But if they're not meat, why should I burn them? And that would be a question on Rav, because Rav says that they are not meat. So why should I burn them? So this is how we're going to have our three answers. Rav Hisda is going to say that the Mishnah, when it's talking about the sinews that you have to burn, is referring to Gid Hanasheh, which is we're assuming is edible, right? In other words, it's in terms of its meat value, right? You can physically eat it, except that you're not allowed to eat it. Well, being not allowed to eat it also makes it inedible. So we're gonna see the case of why it's edible yet you can't eat it. Rav Ashi is also going to talk about the fat around the Gid Hanasheh, and Ravina is going to be talking about the outer nerve next to the Gid Hanasheh. So that's how we're going to explain it. So Rav Hisda says, "Lo nisracha ela legid hanasheh ve'alibad Rabbi Yehuda." He's adding that not just if you follow the majority opinion says that the Gid Hanasheh of both hind legs are prohibited. In that case, you wouldn't have a solution here because the Gid Hanasheh, although it's you can chew it, it's prohibited from eating. So therefore, it's inedible, and therefore you don't have to burn it even because it's not something that you could have eaten. So that wouldn't work. But Rabbi Yehuda gives us an opening. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer eno noheg ela be'achat v'adat machrat shel yamin. Rabbi Yehuda says Gid Hanasheh applies only to one of the legs, and it's not really clear which one. And it says it seems to make sense that it would be the right hind leg. That Gid Hanasheh is the one that's prohibited. The other one is permitted. So therefore, since actually only one of these is prohibited, but people don't generally eat either of them, so there is one of these that is permitted to eat and is edible, and yet because of this safek, we don't eat either of them. Therefore, it must be burned. So this is a case where something is technically and halachically edible, but no one is going to eat it because we're more careful, and that's why it needs to be burnt. So just to clarify that, di mafshit peshita le hayde tera nechle udisra nishteye lama le serefa. So now are you coming to say that Rabbi Yehuda actually didn't know? He was in safek, because if he knew which one, then the one that's permitted, the left one, he should eat, and the right one, throw out. And he said, Hadat Machrat Shel Yamin. So if he was sure, then we would know. So are you saying it must be that he actually wasn't sure? Is that what you're saying? Right, and we don't want to say that he wasn't sure about it. It looks like he does know. No, it must be he's adding another suffix to it, that at some point we knew which one was the right leg and the left leg. I mean, it was attached to the animal. We knew which one it was which. But after we took them out, they got mixed up. And that's why. So we don't want to assume that the Rabbi Yehuda did not actually know which one is permitted and prohibited. He did know, but it's a case where we mixed it up. Okay, this is quite a ukimta to assume that our entire Mishnah is only talking, when it says Gidin, it's only talking about according to the Rabbi Yehuda, and only the one that was not the left one, and only in a case where it got mixed up with the right one. That's the case of Gidin that is talking about, that you have to burn it. So it's a bit far-fetched. So Rav Ashi gives a second answer. Rav Ashi, the fat that's around the Gid Hanasheh, when it mentions sinews, it's not just the Gid Hanasheh itself, which is definitely prohibited and therefore not edible, but all the area around it. Tanya, shamno mutar v'Yisrael kedoshim hem v'nogin bo isur. Even though technically it's permitted to eat, because we are a holy people, we want to keep away from anything that's prohibited, and we don't want to get too close to it. So since our practice is not to eat any of the fat around it, the fat is edible, but we don't eat it. So that's what's talking about, that has to be burnt. And the third answer is Ravina Amar Bechison. This is the outer one. Here's a nice picture, right? You have the inner nerve is here, but there's also an outer nerve that goes parallel to it. And so Ravina says, "Bechison, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Shnei Gidin hen pinimia samuch la'etzem asur." The one that next to the bone is prohibited, v'chayabin alav, and be liable if you ate it. Chison samuch lebasar asur v'en chayabin alav. The outer one, you would not be liable. In other words, according to Torah law, it would be fine. It would be edible, but by rabbinic law, we say asur, don't eat it. So this would fall into this case. Since it is physically edible, you can chew it and eat it. And halachically, according to the Torah, it's edible. Therefore, this is something that should be eaten, part of the Korban Pesach. But since the rabbis say you're forbidden to eat it, therefore we're going to have to burn it. Okay, so that's how we came up with the case of something that is, both edible and not edible and needs to be burned. All right, finally, why can't we burn the notar on Yom Tov? After all, there's a commandment to burn the notar on Yom Tov. There's also a commandment not to do melacha on Yom Tov. But you have a naseh versus a lo taseh. So in general, we should be able to perform the aseh despite the lo taseh. This would not apply to Shabbat. Shabbat is very chamur. We would not apply that. But Yom Tov is much more lenient. So the question is, why can't we burn the notar on Yom Tov? 4 answers. One is because the pasuk says ad boker in the morning twice to teach this extra thing. Another one says because pasuk regarding Shabbat tamid. Third one is because it's similar to a postponed circumcision. We'll see that. And fourth is that resting on Yom Tov is also a positive commandment. So you have a positive and a negative versus only a positive. All right, let's see these pesukim. The commandment to burn the leftover of the Korban Pesach should override the lo taseh of doing labor on Yom Tov. Answer number 1. Amar Chizkiah v'chen taned b'Chizkiah. Amar Kera. Lo totiru mimenu ad boker v'anotar mimenu ad boker b'esh tisrofu. Do not leave any leftover of the Korban Pesach until the morning, and whatever you left over until the morning, burn in fire. Why until the morning twice? Shen tamud omad ad boker. You could just say it once. Ma tamud omad ad boker again. The second one teaches you morning, meaning 2 days later, right? Not the first morning after we do Korban Pesach and the Seder, but rather the next morning after that, which is the 16th. Good. Answer number 2, Abaye Amar keda olat Shabbat be-Shabbato velo olat chol be-Shabbat velo olat chol be-Yom Tov. The Torah says that you will burn the olah of Shabbat on Shabbat. So you can violate Shabbat for the purposes of the olah, the korban tamid of Shabbat, including the leftovers of it can be burnt on Shabbat itself. But you cannot take the one korban tamid from chol, let's say the korban tamid from Friday afternoon. You can't burn the leftovers of that on Shabbat. You can't violate Shabbat for that which came before Shabbat. And also, you can't violate Yom Tov for something that was on chol. And therefore, this korban, the korban Pesach that you brought on chol, you brought it on the 14th, right? When it was not yet the holiday, you cannot now override Yom Tov and burn the leftovers on Yom Tov. You got to wait till Chol HaMoed. Third answer, Rav Amar Amar Kerahu levado ye'aseh lachem. On Yom Tov, only that which is edible are you allowed to do. You can violate. You can do melacha on Yom Tov and cook and fire and prepare food and all that for something edible, but only if you're going to eat it. You're not eating this. Now, hu velo machshirav. The word hu comes to exclude anything that is a preparation that you could have done before. Like you can't go cut down a tree and light a fire and all that because you could have done all that before. You can only use an existing flame and you cook on it, right? Because the rest you could have prepared before. Levado, what does the word levado come to include? Velo milah shelo bizmana ba'a mikal v'chomer, and not a brit milah that's done the wrong time. If a brit milah is on the 8th day, that overrides both Shabbat and Yom Tov. But let's say brit milah had to be delayed, right? Because the baby was sick. Or let's say someone's converting, and so it's not the 8th day. They can do brit milah whenever they want. You can't do that kind of brit milah on Shabbat and not on Yom Tov. Now, we might have thought based on the kal vachomer that you would be able to do so. The kal vachomer is that you can, if someone has a mark of leprosy, let's say they have it on the foreskin. Now, in general, you can't cut off a sign of leprosy. You can't just cut it off and say, "Oh, see, I'm okay." And yet, you're allowed to do it if it's on the foreskin. So you see that brit milah overrides leprosy, and leprosy is more important than Shabbat, because leprosy is more important than avodah, than the sacrifices, because let's say the only kohen around is a leper. He still cannot perform the sacrifices. So leprosy overrides sacrifices. Sacrifices override Shabbat and Yom Tov, because we perform sacrifices that are needed on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So if you follow that whole thing, right, then it turns out that circumcision should, in all cases, because you can cut off the leprous mark on circumcision anytime, even on the 8th day. Therefore, leprosy should override Shabbat and Yom Tov. But in order to counter that complicated kal vachomer, the pasuk says levado, that only something that you can cook on Yom Tov, but you cannot do a brit milah that's not on the 8th day on Yom Tov or Shabbat. Okay, what's the point of this whole answer? As follows. You can only do a brit milah that has to be that day, the 8th day, but not one that you could do any day. So too, notar, that you have to burn. You don't have to burn it on the 16th. You just, burn it at the first opportunity. So since you can burn it on the 17th, therefore, just like brit milah that you can do anytime, you cannot do on Yom Tov, so too, notar, that you can burn anytime, you cannot burn it on Yom Tov. Good. That is the third answer, and the final answer of Rav Ashi Amar, Shabbaton de Yom Tov asehu ve'naseh doche lo ta'aseh va'aseh. So Shabbaton, right? So the Yom Tov is called a day of resting. So that's a day. That's an aseh, right? On Yom Tov, you are not allowed to do melacha, and you also must rest. So since you have both the negative and the positive commandments, and aseh, the positive commandment to burn the notar, is not going to override Yom Tov, which has both a lo ta'aseh and an aseh. And so therefore, we have all 4 reasons why we don't burn the notar on Yom Tov, and we were able to explain every part of our Mishnah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.